The camera's above the water one more time, this time to check the emergent vegetation. And there's lots of it. Back at boat level, oops, wrong type. This is a shallow water emergent cabbage that you'll find on mudflats, which flood at high tide and show up exposed at low tide. There are some bass here on the outside edges as the tide falls. But here's what we're looking for. Water chestnut, which holds lots of bass. Water chestnut's a type of weed peculiar in this hemisphere to the Chesapeake estuary and the Hudson with its connected waterways, the Mohawk River and Lake Champlain. And yep, they're connected. It's peculiar because it's imported. Wherever you find it, it forms massive, all but impenetrable green carpets. So our first lure of choice, the weedless spoon. The weedless spoon's a broadcast bait. You use it to locate scattered fish and pinpoint and pattern where they're holding. If they're along the edge, in scattered patches or holes, or in the thick stuff back a ways. It's personal preference, but mine's a half-ounce Johnson spoon in either black or silver, and I tip it with a grub for more action at the slow retrieve speeds. Speed control, as always, is very important. Here I'm working a little quicker, hoping for a reaction strike. Now, often you can find fish that way and then catch them with a slower retrieved spoon or by flipping or pitching. And when working a weed bed, keep an eye peeled for that something different, like this log laying in a chestnut patch. Or this piece of brush. Now watch as a small fish moves the spoon left to right. Ah, missed. So we try again. And try again. And missed again. This type of fishing can give you heart palpitations. You can see how the fish tries to grab the bait here and gets a mouthful of weeds instead. You get a flying spoon. Ah, here's a point of weeds. Looks very provocative. The tide is dead low, so the bass ought to be on the edge. Let's see. This isn't ordinary fishing, by the way. You need a heavy-duty rod. I prefer a 7.5-foot flipping stick and 17-pound test line or better. And it requires patience. If you try to set the hook right when the bass hits, you're going to miss. When a fish hits, drop your rod, wait a beat, then set hard. Of course, a really aggressive bass makes it all academic. Got one! Whoa! Good fish! Whoa! He's in the weeds now. That's the hardest thing about... Whoa! Whoa! Nice fish. You notice the color. It's very, very green. That's a weed fish. Geez, I do go on. Speaking of which, there's more than one way to fool a chestnut largemouth. When you fish a spoon, to a certain extent, you need the bass to cooperate. Sometimes, as you saw, they just blow up on it. Other times, they ignore it. That's when we flip. When the fish are in a neutral feeding mode, you have to drop the bait right on their nose. That's what flipping's about. It's quiet, so you don't spook them. And because of the short length of line you're fishing with, it gives you lots of control. And you're going to need it in this green stuff. As to why I flip a worm, well, there's two reasons. Jigs are okay in holes in the chestnut, but they won't penetrate the thick stuff. And this is thick, at least on the surface. Below the waterline, it's a different story. Under this protective green canopy lies a rich open habitat teeming with life, including baitfish and the young of the American eel. These things are born in the Sargasso Sea somewhere on the ocean, and they migrate up the Hudson, and when they get big in the Hudson, and well, before they get big, a lot of them are eaten up by the bass here, and that's what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to fool the bass into thinking this is one of these elvers, which is what that's called, the young of the American eel. What's interesting is if you're very watchful, you can actually see the motion of the bass as it pursues the worm. And the worm will drop through, for example, and suddenly there'll be a little floop, floop, floop along the surface of the chestnut. I got one. Whoa, good one. Wallowing. Whoa, and you got to get him right out of there. Otherwise, they'll wrap himself up. Whoa. This is where 17-pound test line comes in real handy. Ah. This is what makes Hudson River bassing just a little bit special. You'll find chestnut all over the Hudson River system, including the feeder creeks, with the most massive beds between West Point and Saugerties on the main river. As a point of information, water chestnut is not really a navigation hazard. You see, it grows in about 5 to 8 feet of water in protected areas out of the main channel. The ever-present tide, as it falls, flushes the clouds of bait out of the beds. Now, the bass will locate on the edges. They'll station themselves on points and in cuts. On a rising tide, as the current reverses, the chestnut beds act as a current break and then sanctuary for both bait and bass. As the tide continues to rise, the bait will move deeper into the beds and the bass will follow. Besides skimming a spoon or flipping a worm, try twitching a stick bait or running a buzz bait or spinner bait along and through a scattered type chestnut bed. Here's how you see the plant up close. Underneath, it has a series of inflated float pods. It's called chestnut, by the way, because at the end of summer they develop hard, spiny, chestnut-looking seeds or nuts. Did you know it was originally brought here by mistake? The fellow who imported it thought he was going to feed the world. Turns out he picked the wrong water chestnut. All this one feeds is the prop on your trolling motor. But if you know how to fish it, it can fill your live well. Good one. Whoa! In any case, when you're bassing the Hudson, make sure that you check the chestnut.